All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you. This is a presentation of empowering your world with Alexa. My name is Steven Saylor, and I am a senior engineer with Clean Slate. So Clean Slate is a privately held company in Carmel, consulting practice that has been voted best place to work from 2016 through 2018. We have a variety of different consulting practices like cloud, enterprise integration, Salesforce, and we're partners with some of the major vendors out there, which I will call out are AWS and Azure. For me personally, I am a big fan of AWS, and that's kind of my bread and butter. So that's really where I do a lot of my work. So if you want to talk with us, reach out to us in our sponsor Clean Slate channel. And without further ado, let's get into it. So today what we're going to talk about 4 different topics. We're going to go through a session overview. So I'm actually tying this into my last presentation a little bit lightly. So if you weren't in it, totally fine. But we're going to continue on that idea where we stood up a static site and we want to see how can we integrate Alexa into that workflow on a DevOps standpoint. So we're going to talk about voice apps then. Just do an overview of those, talk about voice-based technologies, and then why did we pick Alexa? We're going to go into an Alexa breakdown of what are the different components of an Alexa skill. And then we're going to do a code walkthrough for an Alexa app that we wrote called Ops Buddy. So, all right, to catch everybody up on what happened in the last presentation, and in my best soap opera TV voice, previously on Clean Slate presentations. In the last presentation, I attempted to convince my boss, Chris, that we should go from a technology group to a travel group. Now, understandably, he was a little skeptical, but we stood up a static site, we tested the market. Here you can see on the right-hand side, kind of how we built this in Amazon. Great static sites, been working really well. We're using CloudFront, S3, Certificate Manager, and Route 53. And I gotta say, the market responded really well. So much so that we've actually had to add a couple new features. So here's what we built on. We added a Git repo using AWS code commit, think GitHub or Bitbucket, but Amazon's private flavor. We used code pipeline for a CI/CD pipeline. We stood up some Lambda functions for updating our S3 bucket and invalidating our cache through CloudFront. And then we created our Alexa skill named Ops Buddy. So you can see here, we've got our pipeline, we have our Lambdas, we have our Ops Buddy code, and we have the Ops Buddy skill, which integrates with our pipeline. So you're in luck. We have a update we have to make to our site, and we're gonna do it live right here with you. So if we come over here and we look at our site, we see our static site. What we need to do is we need to update the copyright. We realize that it is no longer 2019. So we're going to go through, we're going to update this live, and we're going to use Alexa to deploy it. So let's go and let's make our change to our code. All right, I've got our website code here. I'm going to come down here to our copyright. I'm just going to change that to 2020. I can see the update. So update copyright. Let's commit it and push. All right, so we've made that change, and you guys should be able to follow along on the site as well. This is up and live for you guys to hit as well. So now we want to do 3 different things using our handy dandy Ops Buddy Alexa skill. We are going to check the status of the last deployment. We're going to ensure that our site is healthy, and then we're going to do a deployment to production. Now you might be asking, okay, how does this Google Authenticator page tie anything into this? Well, you don't want anybody just to be able to deploy to production. So what we did is we added some safeguards, and I'm going to show you how that works here in a second. But we have users who are going to deploy to production. They need to provide a user ID and a passcode in the form of a one-time password in order to actually properly authenticate and deploy to production. So without further ado, let's do this live. Alexa, open Ops Buddy.
Ops Buddy here. What do you need?
What was the status of my last deployment?
The last deployment succeeded. It was started at 6:18 p.m. UTC on March 26, 2020 and was last updated at 6:20 p.m. UTC on March 26, 2020. Is there anything else I can do for you?
Is my site healthy?
The site is healthy and returned an HTTP status code of 200. Is there anything else I can do for you?
No, thanks.
Goodbye.
All right before we do the deployment to production, I just want to break down what that was. So what we just did was we had, I'm going to mute, otherwise it'll go off every time I say Alexa. We just did a check into our code pipeline to check what the status of the last deployment was. So that information was coming directly from code pipeline. And we just ran an HTTP status code check. So that is the live health check of the site right now. So now we're going to deploy through production. And I'm going to grab my authenticator. There's only so many hands I have. All right. Alexa, open Ops Buddy.
Yeah. I'm Ops Buddy. Blah, blah, blah. What do you want?
Deploy to production.
Can you please provide me with your user ID?
351.
What is your passcode?
769885.
Deployment approved. Triggering the deployment now. Is there anything else I can do for you?
No, thanks.
Goodbye.
All right, so we have actually just kicked off our deployment. Let's go look at our code pipeline. All right, we can see that it's actually already pulled our source and it is down into the deployment stage. So what it's going to do is it's going to update this copyright down here, bring my window all the way up to 2020. So here in these stages right here, the deploy media, it's going to grab our video files and images. It's going to copy them into our live bucket that we're using for production. And then it's going to go in and it's going to deploy the source code from the site into that bucket as well. So let's just finish that stage now. And now it's going through and it's invalidating the cache in CloudFront. If you're not sure what that is, please check out the recording of my last session when they're available. We cover that. So we're going to give this a second to do its invalidation. And then we are going to check our site. So we'll give it just a second. Let's pull our site over here. Okay, we actually see it just finished. So let's take a look. Did it refresh? Did it update? There we go. We have just used, okay, and it's muted. Otherwise, like I said, it'll go off every time I say Alexa. We have just used our Alexa skill, Ops Buddy, to check the status of our website, to check on the last deployment and get information about it, and to do a live production deployment. So my backup slide here, in case you guys couldn't see them. These are what the screens look like on the actual Alexa device. And in this case, I'm using one of the 5-inch shows. But this is the information that gets displayed for these different requests. So let's take a step back. Why might we want to use voice apps? Well, voice apps are a pretty awesome technology, and they're gaining a huge widespread adoption. They can provide some simpler and more intuitive ways of interacting with code and just having this interesting interface. There's a ton of different devices out there. I mean, you have the Amazon Alexa, Google Home, Microsoft Cortana, Apple Siri, smart TVs, and half the time some of the smart TVs either come with their own or you can integrate them with Alexa Google Home and what have you. And voice apps are actually kind of a cool implementation of chat apps. So you might ask, what is chat apps? I know DevOps, I know DevSecOps. What is chat apps? Well, chat apps is a form of automation and interaction with scripts, tools, code, etc., but using conversational driven development. So a lot of times you write bots. Now these sometimes come in the form of what you'll see in a Slack channel or a Teams channel. A lot of times they're text-based bots, which are great. But you can use things like Alexa and some of the actual real voice devices to really get involved with that as well. So you're not just restricted to text-based apps, but you can actually do voice-based apps. So these bots can help us easily automate manual tasks. There's some existing chatbot frameworks or chat app frameworks out there. There's Whobot, Lita, and a lot of people even just use webhooks. So why do we pick Alexa? I mean, you just got done telling us that there's a ton of different devices. Well, in this case, and partly because I'm a big fan of AWS and Amazon technologies, but more importantly, Alexa is the leader in the smart speaker market right now. And devices are plentiful. There is a variety of different devices. There are some with screens and not screens. There are bigger screens, smaller screens. You can get one for your car. You can get the app on your phone. There's several different implementations of Alexa-based speakers, and they're relatively inexpensive. I think they range anywhere from $30-ish to $200-ish, and they integrate really easily into AWS. And also there's some business grade options that make it kind of an interesting technology for the workplace. There's Alexa for Business, which is a service in AWS, and it can help with as like a meeting room assistant and even to host some private skills. So let's talk a little bit about Alexa itself. There's kind of this misnomer that Alexa is the speakers. That's not actually true. There are two components to what we just saw with the speaker I have, and they are that Alexa is actually a voice service. Now it can be used on various hardwares. That's why you can get it on your smart home TV or as an app on your phone. Amazon Echo, however, is the hardware that is specialized to work with Alexa. So the device I'm using is an Amazon Echo Show 5 running the Alexa voice service. There are multiple different types of skills out there that you can use and that you can write. There's custom interactions, which is what we created with OpsBuddy. There's smart home, flash briefing video, etc. And you can see just a list here of some of the different skills that you can write. All right, so now we're going to dive into what makes up an Alexa skill. Now there's two parts of this that we're going to talk about. There is the piece that is the Alexa skill, which is in the Alexa Developer Console. Then there's the piece that is the infrastructure that we're going to talk about, and that's the back end and the logic for our services. So here we can see the first piece that we're going to come across is an invocation name. So that's the name associated with our app. So just the same way that Alexa is the wake word for the Alexa voice service, your invocation name is let's call it the wake word for your skill. So in our case, it was OpsBuddy. So when I say Alexa, open OpsBuddy, we are invoking our skill. Then, and you can see that here, there are intents. So Alexa doesn't actually provide back to the developer exactly what a user is saying. She instead actually tries to interpret what a user is saying and then uses that to try to trigger off the intent that she believes that the user was trying to call. We're going to delve into this a little bit more. There's two types of intents out there. There are custom, so these are user-based intents, ones that we would write for custom implementation. And there are built-in intents, such as the Amazon cancel intent or the help intent, etc. And you can see some of those for OpsBuddy right over here. In our case, we have 3 different custom intents and 6 different built-in intents. Next are components. Now, the components of an intent. There are utterances and there are slots. So utterances are the sample phrases that we use to trigger a specific intent. So kind of similar how the invocation name triggers our skill, utterances trigger our intent. So when I say open OpsBuddy and then is my website healthy? And she comes back and tells me, yes, it returned a status code of 200, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we're actually invoking and calling our intent. So we can see here from the developer console, this deploy my site. And then there's also slots. So we're going to take, for instance, the deploy production, where that one's the most difficult of all of them for the Apps Buddy app, or for the Apps Buddy skill, I'm sorry. And slots are placeholders for retrieving specific pieces of data. So if you remember, she had to ask me for my user ID and my passcode, which were very specific pieces of information that we need to run logic on in order to do the validation and then the deployment. So these slots are integrated with sample utterances, and they're of specific data types. So in this case down here, we can see that we have 2 slots for our skill, for our Ops Buddy skill, and they're both numbers. And you can see here on the right-hand side where we would add these placeholders in to a sample utterance. So we could say deploy to production with user ID, our placeholder or our slot, and passcode, that's our slot. And that's where Alexa is listening for that data and is going to return that to us. All right, cards. So cards are how Alexa shows visual data. So when we saw the screen, the information that got returned to it, those are cards. They can be shown on devices with the screen, but also on your Alexa mobile app and even at alexa.com. So here on the right-hand side is what a card would look like in your Alexa app. And here at the bottom is what it would look like in the alexa.amazon.com screen. All right, speech synthesis markup language. It's a mouthful, SSML. This is the language that is used to control how output and speech is generated for Alexa. So there are multiple effects that can be used with SSML. We're just going to call 3 of them out here, but there are plenty more. There are like emotions. So if you want Alexa to sound, integrate some emotion, not just so like flat, you could use emotions. And we see it here as this first bit of code. You can add a emotion tag with excited and an intensity. So she will sound excited when she says, hey there. Next would be like a break, which allows for pauses. I'm actually using that for the deployment. So, here the second example, deployment approved, triggering the deployment now. Wait 1 second and then ask the user, is there anything else I can do for you? It just adds for a better interface. Give the user a second to consume what they just had and then ask them if they want to do another operation. And then there's the say as. So say as tells Alexa how to pronounce certain things like dates and times. Excuse me. So the last deployment information, this bottom one here. The last deployment was, and I have placeholders here, but it was started at a specific time on a say as interpret specific date. So why might we want to use that? Well, because not all things that are good visually are good in voice. So whereas we might say that it is, in text, we might write the date as 3/27/20. Well, we don't really want Alexa to tell us that our deployment was on 3/27/20. We'd like her to tell us it was on March 27th, 2020. And so what this say as is doing is it's interpreting that text-based date and converting it into a more speech-friendly version of it. All right, then there's endpoints. So this is how we bind an Alexa skill to our backend code. And then in our case, we're using Lambda for Ops Buddy. And then our infrastructure. So there's the integration piece between Alexa and Lambda, and we're going to go through that here in a minute. And then why would we want to use Lambda? Well, we can use it for pretty much anything, and our logs are available on CloudWatch. So we get all the perks of using a Lambda, and we're just tying it in and triggered by Alexa. And finally, the Alexa Skills Kit or the Ask SDK. In this case, I'm using the Python Ask SDK, but it allows us to more easily write Alexa skills. So let's take a look at Ops Buddy. So I'm going to pull up the developer console. We're going to take a look at our skills. All right, so here we are in the Ops Buddy Alexa skill. Now, there's a lot going on here, but should look kind of familiar. Over here on the left-hand side in this menu, we can see our invocation, our intents, our slots. So let's look at our invocation. Here's where we're going to give the name for invoking our app. We have our intents and then our custom intents. So we can see here what are some of the sample utterances that we use to deploy to production. So I could say trigger prod deployment, deploy prod, deploy production, deploy my site. And we see down here these two different slots that for the user ID and the passcode. Now you might be asking, you didn't provide that when you told it to deploy to production, nor do you have an utterance to do that. Well, so how does that work? And that's a great question. So let's hop into one of these intents. Let's look at the user ID intent. And I'm using a feature of this intent called required. So is this slot required to fulfill the intent? Yes. There's an option in an Alexa skill to say that an intent is required. And what that does is that offloads the burden of retrieving that information to Alexa so that she will actually reprompt users to get that information if she doesn't get it. And so you provide some of the speech prompts or what she will say in order to collect that information. So can you please provide me with your user ID, or what is your user ID? So when I say deploy to production, she'll ask, what is your user ID? Once she gets the information that that slot needs, she will then move on to the next required intents. We can see here also is what are the sample utterances for that slot. So user ID, in the slot here, or my user ID is, and then slot value, or even just the slot value. You don't have to have any text ahead of it. Same thing for passcode. That's how we get both of those pieces of information. We have our built-in intents. Now keep in mind, some of these are required, such as your cancel intent, your fallback intent, help intent. These are actually required for any Alexa skill. Now we see our slot types down here. In this case, we are just using a number for Amazon. But there are a ton of different slot types. So we can come over, let's take this for example. We see in this dropdown, if we wanted to change this, it's not just like a number and a string. There's actor, administrative area, airline, airport. There are a ton of built-in slot types that you can take advantage of. And I highly recommend that you do if you need one of those types. And then down here we have our JSON editor. So all that stuff that we just covered with our intents and our slots and our invocation name actually can be dropped into a single JSON document, which you can source control. And I've actually done that. So you will get access to my slides, access to my code, and I do provide my interaction model that you can use to duplicate this skill. We're going to come down here to endpoints. This is where we bind our Alexa skill to our Lambda. And we're going to hop over to AWS here in just a second, but the piece of information that we need to pull in from the Alexa skill is the skill ID, and the Lambda is going to require that. And then the ARN of the Lambda, we're going to need to provide here. So I've already done that, but let's take a look at where we can find that information and put that. So let's hop over to Lambda. And then we're going to go into Ops Buddy. So up here, we can see our ARN. This is the information that we need to provide to the Alexa skill in order to use this Lambda. And then down in here, we have a trigger. which is an Alexa Skills Kit trigger. And this is where we provide our skill ID. Those two pieces are required to bind it together. So now I know that our code's not here, so I'm gonna actually pull up the code and let's take a look at what the code looks like. All right, so there's a lot going on here. Some things I'm going to call out early are my imports. The one I want to call out is this PyOTP. This is a library that we're using to generate those one-time passwords. And that actually has to get zipped up and deployed into your package for your Lambda. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this. You can see that we're importing the Alexa, the Ask SDK, and then we can see the skill builder being created, et cetera. So I'm going to go through this and I'm going to pick out just a few pieces here. This code will be made available to you. So go ahead, play with it, tweak it, use it for your own, what have you. We can see here a dictionary of authorized users. And so those are our user IDs and the sync codes. And yes, if this was a real app, it would not be putting them there. I'm just going to say that right now. I just wanted to put those there so that you could see how that works and that they're available to you. We have our model objects here that we parse our data into. And then we have our intent handlers. And so like a launch intent, I'm going to go down and we're going to find the deploy to prod one because that's really the most interesting one here. And we can see there are two different functions that come in for the Ask SDK. There's a can handle and a handle function. So can handle will say, see a event come in to the Lambda, and it'll say, is that intent name the intent that was invoked? So we saw over on the developer kit. If it is, and let's just say that we said, deploy to production, it will come down here into the implementation of that handler. And so what we're doing here is we're pulling out our slots first. So this is where you can retrieve your user ID and your passcode for Ops Buddy, or any whatever apps you end up making in the future, your values will come in slots. So this is important to know where that's at. We're pulling out our data that we need, printing out some debug statements, grabbing from environment variables the name of our pipeline, and then we're going to trigger a deployment. So I have a function down here that goes through, it takes the pipeline name, it takes the user ID, it takes the passcode, it verifies them. So let's go here, check if it's an authorized deployment. And what happens here is the user ID is used to look up in that dictionary, the sync code, and then the Ops Buddy skill will generate the one-time password and compare it to the one that was provided by the user. If they match, then you're approved. It will go ahead and kick off the deployment in Code Pipeline. And then it will return that data. So here's what that data looks like when it's returned. So if we receive from that function execution ID, then we're going to build two pieces of information here that are going to get output. We're going to build our speech text and we're going to build our card text. So our speech text, you can see here they're SAML because they're wrapped in the speech tag or in the speak tag, and we're using our break here, as you can see. This is what Alexa is actually going to verbally say back to us. So she'll say deployment approved if we have a ID that's returned, and if not, invalid authorization, deployment is canceled. Is there anything else I can do for you? And then along with that, we're going to generate some text that's going to show up on the card. In this case, it's going to be deployment approved, and then spit out the pipeline ID. And right here on line 133, we're going to build that response and input that information. So this is building the Alexa response, and then it's going to send it back to the Alexa voice service. So we're going to use speak, and we're going to drop our speech text in there. Then we're going to provide our card text. Now, I do want to say that you are not required to put cards for everything. And actually, in a lot of cases, you probably don't even want to use cards. Now, for this Ops Buddy, we actually wanted to be able to visually see that information and have it available to us so that we could do lookups. But if you're doing other apps, you may not actually want to have cards. And so no, it's not required. And there's actually two types of cards that you can have. You can have a simple card and a standard card. Standard cards allow you to do things like putting new lines in and even putting some images in. Simple cards just do kind of spit out the text. And then finally, we have this set should end session, and we're setting it to false. So this is how Alexa knows to listen for another command. So when she says deployment approved, triggering the deployment now. If this value was set to true, then she would say this, she'd even ask, is there anything else I can do for you? But then would stop listening and actually exits the skill. And that's not what we want her to do, because we want to be able to ask subsequent calls without having to invoke the Ops Buddy skill every time. So I don't want to have to say Ops Buddy do this and then Ops Buddy do this. I'd rather have kind of a chain where I can ask about the last deployment and the health. That's how we do this. So we set that to false so that she knows to listen again for a new command. Now that listening period is about 8 seconds. So just keep that in mind. Is she'll say this and then she will listen for 8 seconds. And then you can add a reprompt she'll ask the user again. So you can see in the code that we have the other intents, the health check. We're not really going to go through these. You are more than welcome to go through them in the code though. Let's pull up our slides. All right, so what's next? This is not a complete app. The next thing that would kind of be along with this would be the skill, publish our skill. So in this case, this skill is just in development mode. I'm actually going to cycle back real quick to cover something that might be confusing. With skills that are in the development standpoint or in the development stage, you can test them right here. So even if you don't have an Alexa app, you can still write your own apps, test them here through this test functionality in the developer console. So I could say over here, open Ops Buddy.
Sorry, there was some problem. Please try again.
Apparently it doesn't like me right now, but we can see the JSON input that goes into the skill. We can see the output that we get back. We can see the card that would be shown. And we can actually, if you had a mic, you could hook it up here and use the voice skill right here. I do want to call this out though, is that skill testing is enabled in. This is set to off by default. And if you do not enable this, you can't use your device to test it. It won't actually be testable. So make sure if you're writing an app to go over to the test stage and to turn on development mode. So publishing a skill. If you wanted to take this through to completion, if you wanted to make this available across all of the different Alexas out there and publish it to the skill library, you could actually do that, absolutely do that. So we have our app right now, because it's targeted towards us, is in a development mode. So it's just private to my developer account. Now I could go on and make an Alexa for Business account, and I could publish it into there and make it available on shared devices or shared Alexas throughout my organization. We could then, we could publish skills, so publishing them, making them available. We could do different types of skills and different features like authorization. So I don't know how many of you actually have an Alexa or has used one. There's apps like Spotify where you actually have to log into your account. There's a whole lot of different options out there. So for at least Ops Buddy, one of the things maybe in the future we could consider is adding something like authorization. And you could even possibly, if you wanted to turn it into a real service, you could deploy this and have user authentication and just make a product of it. I mean, there's so many possibilities to this technology. It's amazing. And either way, just go build. Get involved with this awesome technology. Learn what it's about. Play with it, tinker with it, see what you can do, and contribute. So how do you get started? Well, first, go out, download the presentation materials. I have CloudFormation out there to deploy my infrastructure. I have my interaction model out there for Alexa. I have my Lambda code out there. And actually, I also have my slides out there. So step 2 here, read and get hands-on with some proven resources. So I added a link to a list of some of the resources that I used as I was trying to learn this. Go out there, read those, learn about it, do tutorials, build your own stuff. And then third is get connected with me, get involved in the community, and just capitalize on this awesome technology. So you can reach out to me here on my LinkedIn. You can reach out to me through my email. And I just want to thank everybody for coming to this presentation. You can reach out to us on our sponsor channel over in CleanSlate. And I actually have one more thing is as a thank you from CleanSlate, we'd like to make you aware of some special offers that we have for all attendees that we found to provide a great value. So the first is focused on cloud cost optimization, because I mean, who doesn't like to save money? And the second is our planning workshop, which is designed to help you build a strategy to get the most out of your cloud investment. So if you're interested, please head over to our sponsor channel and someone will connect with you. Thank you.